Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam right here on DZRJ Radio and RJ TV, channel 224 on Sky Cable. My name is Eric Lecain. Here on the Jam, we talk about what's going on in the world, what has happened this week outside of the Philippines, so you can stay up to date with the most interesting news that's out there. Now, today, we're going to be talking about how the Philippine U.S. citizens could possibly be influencing the U.S. election. Of course, some Donald Trump news. How exciting. Updates on the Salman Rushdie attempted murder. Was the CDC response to COVID as bad as we thought? Some new twists on blowing up the Ukrainian nuclear reactor. Getting paid for having kids in Russia. Getting 20-year-olds to drink in Japan. Mosquitoes are smarter than we thought. And the new Game of Thrones. All here on the World News Jam, right here on DZRJ. But first, I wanted to start out today with sports. Does anyone out there play softball? I played a lot of softball there in my home in the state of North Carolina. We had a big yard, beat up wooden bat, lots of tape on it, raggedy ball, bunch of kids. That's all you need. Just steal some trash can lids for bases and you got yourself a game. We would play for an hour and argue for an hour on the rules. Then play until mom called us in for supper. Anyway, when I came to the Philippines, I had no idea you had softball here, but boy, do you. I remember seeing it over at the PSC field, just blown away at the speed those pitchers could throw the ball. Now, seeing the Philippines playing in the 2022 World Series of Softball, well, it wasn't much of a surprise. But what was a surprise was how amazing they were. Just to set the stage, the Philippines was by far the shortest team in the tournament. I mean, sometimes it really looked like little children playing against adults. Some of the American teams were huge compared to the Filipinos, which, by the way, they were made up of players from the Negros province. Now, the way I understand it, they did not have a playoff game to go to the World Series. However, the team had won back in 2019, so they were obviously the choice to go again to the U.S. to play in the prestigious tournament, which, by the way, was broadcast on ESPN. So now, when they went 2019, they did not do so well into the tournament with only winning one game. According to my softball sources, in this tournament, the tiny Filipino team was not expected to go very far, especially against the powerful, big white girl teams. But things didn't exactly go that way. In the first round, they shut out the Canadian team 1-0. Then in the next round, they beat the European team 4-1. Then they shut out the U.S. New England team 1-0. You get a chance to watch any of these videos. They are so exciting. The picture for the Philippines is amazing. And the incredible teamwork and the diamond knowledge. It was just so much fun to watch. Now, they advanced to the semifinals, which was a feat in itself considering the size of the team. But that's where they met one of those powerful pitchers from the U.S. And the U.S. the Philippines there could not get a hit off that pitcher. But it didn't seem to matter to the Filipinos. They went through every inning. They swung at those lightning pitches like there was nothing to it. I'm not sure if you know, but the pitching mound in softball is like 40 feet from the batter. It's not like in baseball where it's 90 feet. So at this level of play, if you can get a pitcher that has the speed of a college player or higher, they can just take over the game. I know there was this girl in New York, I remember, whose father taught her to pitch when she was just 5 years old. When she joined the Little League, she could already throw at speeds of a pro. She threw a whole season. Not one single person got a hit. They ended up asking her father to please take her out of the league. This pitcher was like that. But honestly, it didn't matter. The Filipino girls made it to the semifinals of the World Series, and they won the Sportsmanship Award. So I just wanted to highlight this moment for Filipino sports. Say congratulations to the little women from Negros who went to the U.S. and put on a big show. They ended up coming in fourth in the Little League World Series. And for me, that's pretty darn good. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ. Now, I try not to get too much into U.S. politics these days because, well, if you're a Filipino living in the Philippines, it's kind of boring. I mean, there's a big election coming up for control of the Senate and the House of Representatives. This is pretty big. Right now, the Senate is split right down the middle. 50 Republicans, 50 Democrats. That pretty much means that it's hard to get much accomplished. But they do sometimes because of the Vice President, Kamala Harris, is the tiebreaker vote. She, of course, is a Democrat. But if either side goes up just one seat beyond 50 in this election, the outcome of history could be altered. Remember when Trump was impeached? If the Democrats had the majority, Trump would not have lasted even 2 years in the White House. If they had been in power, overturning of abortion rights would have never happened. But currently, they are in power because that tiebreaker vote, right now in the U.S., no one will agree about anything with anyone that's not on their side. So there's an election coming down the pipe very soon. Many had thought or predicted that the Republicans were going to blow the dams out of the water because the U.S. economy went off the deep end, gas prices and inflation went up. The current president's not very popular to anyone right now, so it looked like the Republicans were in for a big win. But that has changed. Why? Well, partly because the people running for Republicans, well, they're not very strong candidates. Don't take it from me. Take it from our old friend Mitch McConnell, who wants so bad to be the Republican head of the Senate. But even he said, ugh, our candidates suck. Part of that has to do with the candidates that Trump endorses. Of course, he endorses people that love him and will carry his message that the election was stolen from Trump. But that carries some heavy baggage. Even some hardcore Republicans are sometimes having a hard time to keep swallowing that hot dog. So this has made the race virtually a neck and neck. Down to the wire, dive to the finish. So the question on many people's minds is what group in the group that they group things in is going to swing the Republicans into that 51-49 split, or which is going to do the same for the Democrats. Now, in the U.S., we divide many groups of voters based on race. Why do we do that? Well, it's because the U.S. is pretty much a racist society. Okay, that subject is for a whole nother show, but for this discussion, sometimes you can tell who is going to win a political race based on how an ethnic group is going to vote. For instance, when Joe Biden was in the primaries to run for president, no one thought he had a prayer until in South Carolina, the blacks came out in huge numbers and voted for it. Part of the reason the Republicans do so well in Florida is because of the huge number of Hispanics there who have, in the past few election cycles, voting more conservative. So what about the Asians? The Asians that are living, working, voting in the U.S.? I mean, there's a lot of them. I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot. There's really only about 4% overall that vote in the U.S. But the key is where they vote. Many of these Senate races are very close because of the white vote is so very evenly divided. So many believe that certain ethnic groups are the ones that are going to be deciding these elections. Now, of course, the Chinese and the Indians from India, are the biggest factors because they have the biggest numbers. But there's an article that came out recently that looked at the 3 largest group of Asian voters in the U.S. and how they could very well be the deciding factor in the balance of power in the U.S. And that all-important 3rd largest group, well, that would be the Filipino vote. Now, not a lot of attention is paid to the Filipino vote in the U.S., but if you start to look at the 4+ million Filipinos living in the U.S. and where they are located, you start to see that if there was a swing one way or the other, it really could go down to the influence of who's going to win. For instance, in Nevada, it's a swing state, which means it can go either way, Democrat or Republican. That includes Las Vegas. Now, in the states, currently 5% of voters are Asian, and the other half of those voters, I have to say, are Filipinos. In Las Vegas alone, the Filipinos are close to 10% of Clark County. In a state where races are historically razor close, the Filipino vote could easily tip the scale. The question is, who are they going to vote for? Many Filipinos living in the U.S. are educated with good incomes, usually working in the healthcare industry. These type of people will generally swing Democratic. But on the same token, there are many extremely religious-based Filipinos, based on their background, coming from a very religious country. Those will tend to vote more conservative, based on things like abortion and gun control. Many of those in a poll voted for Donald Trump, around 34% of Filipinos. That has not gone unnoticed among the Republicans, as now they are starting to court the Filipino vote. The Republican National Committee has opened an Asian American Community Center geared toward Filipinos. Even though currently it seems like the Filipinos are still leaning more for the Democratic side, especially in the state of Nevada, as the Asian vote went for Biden. But that doesn't mean that they will vote that way in upcoming elections. Republicans are banking on the idea that they will persuade Filipinos through pushing the idea of patriotism, that the U.S. is friendly to the Philippines. And Trump was a very good friend to Duterte, who many compared to Trump. And now with the election of Marcos, which has also been widely compared to Trump, and the conservatism, many are speculating that the U.S. Filipino voter could start swaying toward the Republican side, just like the Hispanics did in Florida. With elections being decided sometimes on literally less than 100 votes, a group the size of the U.S. Filipinos is not only being counted as a factor, but may be a big factor in who's going to take power in this upcoming election in November. Right now, both sides have about 3 months to court the Filipinos into their side. The big question is, which is currently being studied heavily, is what does it take to get a Filipino to vote for you? Maybe a couple buckets of Jollibee Chicken Joy. Heck, I'd vote for you too. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ. Now, last week we talked a bit about the legal problems surrounding the ex-U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, to get you caught up, the FBI raided his private home in Florida early in the morning, taking with them boxes and boxes of documents. Now, at the time of the raid, many of the people did not know for which crime they were actually investigating Trump for, seeing as Donald Trump is under investigation for several different things: bank fraud, tax fraud, defrauding donors, election fraud, instigation of a riot to overthrow the government. But it's none of those. Of course, as we know now, they raided his home based on the Espionage Act and conspiracy, in which is when a person hides or steals or destroys documents belonging to the U.S. government. So of all those things they're going after Trump, this is the one that they seem to be making some headway on. Partly because it's pretty clear cut. He took documents from the White House, some of which were classified, some of which were top secret, some of which were super classified top secret, like secret, top secret, with the label classification SCI. That's, we know now what SCI is. That's the highest. They are at the level of things like the names of spies and where nuclear weapons are being hidden, or where other people's nuclear weapons are being hidden, or where we keep the captured aliens from space. So why did Trump take these documents? What's he planning to do with them? This is something we really don't know exactly, whether they were mementos or he had planned to give or sell them to the enemies of the U.S. or maybe sell them on eBay. I mean, it's Trump. We do know how Trump is saying how those documents got into his house. He told us this week. Remember, first off, he claimed the U.S. FBI probably planted those in his house. Of course, then the question was, how did they get all those documents in there past his lawyers and guards and Secret Service, yada, yada, yada. So that whole story died down. Then it was that he was taking the documents to his home to work on them. Yet he was no longer the president when he took them out. So why would he need to work on highly classified documents if he was no longer the president? Then he said, well, hey, Obama took 30 million pieces of classified documents when he left the White House. But that was a lie. Pretty much went nowhere. But then came some more tangible excuses. Trump said that he made an order that any documents that he takes out while in the White House are automatically declassified, that once he removed it, then it meant that he had the right to remove it. But the problem with that order that he made was that no one ever heard him make that order before. They asked multiple people working in the White House who would have to have logged such an order. And so far, no one can confirm it was real. And even if it was, it would have to go through several channels of approval. And finally, he said that he thought he would be staying in the White House for a while, like 4 more years. And then he suddenly had to leave. He had to pack everything up very fast. It must have accidentally got packed up, some super classified legal U.S. documents in his luggage, and that's how they got there. Is that possible? According to experts in the National Archives, nope. You cannot accidentally pack up nuclear secrets along with your dirty laundry and family photos. You would need to request the documents, etc., etc. So, what exactly did Trump take? Well, this is something currently before a judge. I mean, it's classified documents, so we as the public, do we get to know what those classified documents are? And if they are part of a bigger criminal investigation into Trump, then by releasing them, is that going to jeopardize that case? And of course, everyone wants to know, could this finally be the one case that puts him away? If you just look into Trump in the last few years, everyone around Trump is either a felon or turned against him. I mean, Steve Bannon, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn, George Papadopoulos, Rick Gates, Elliot Brody, Michael Cohen. They're all felons from Trump's circle that we have talked about at one point here on the show. But even that's not even a complete list of all the Trump guys, just what I can think of. The ones that have either gone to jail or been convicted. But the interesting thing is that some of these dudes got caught for being unregistered foreign agents. That's getting paid by a foreign country for services to further that country's interests in the U.S. And that's illegal if you keep it a secret. But it's starting to make more sense as to why Trump would want to be holding on to top secret documents that many outside of the U.S. might be interested in seeing. Just speculating here, as many are. Could Trump be thinking about future profits, having these documents? I mean, right now, Trump is profiting from the FBI raid itself, sending out blasts of text messages asking people to send him $45 to help fight the FBI. Moving on to other fish, the latest fish to hit the fryer is this guy named Alan Weisenberg. I mean, he was, not one of those guys from the White House, but in Trump's own personal circle. In fact, he was what many call the number 2 guy in the Trump Corporation. He was the chief financial officer in Trump's company. You remember him as the guy that they led out of the office in handcuffs. Anyway, he pleaded guilty this week to a tax scheme that he ran in the Trump company in which he would pay himself in stuff rather than money. That way he doesn't have to pay taxes. He'd get cars, get his rent paid, tuition for his grandchildren. So he admitted that he underreported his income by just paying himself in these things. This is a crime that carries a financial penalty for him, which will be something like $2 million. And he will have to do some time in jail, about 5 months. Now, he could have done 5 to 15 years, which would have been a life sentence for him considering his age. But instead, he chose to cut a deal. Now, the reason the DA wants this so bad to cut a deal with Weisenberg is that the Trump organization will go on trial in October related to criminal tax fraud. Now, he was in the Trump company for 40 years. So he knows a lot of stuff. Trump said he would never flip on him. However, funny how people in Trump's orbit tend to change their minds when they're faced with 15 years in prison. Now, if he goes against Trump's organization in October, this probably won't lead to Trump going to prison. But most likely, we will see some heavy, heavy fines for his organization. And it could very well give some people some gas to some upcoming trials that the ex-president is involved in. So that 75-year-old former CFO to the Trump organization is off to Rikers Island to spend his jail time and join the club of all the many around Trump who have been indicted and been handed jail sentences. The big question is, will they ever be able to catch the big fish? Many of the others have been caught, and it looks like even more are going to be put in ice pretty soon. But this elusive orange whale still out there swimming around, making defamatory comments about anyone who dares to try and harpoon him. In a follow-up story, last week we discussed the attack on Salman Rushdie. He's the writer of the Satanic Verses, which Some very devout Muslim leaders depict it as an attack on the Muslim faith. So they did not want what some Muslims would do in order. What they did was they ordered an assassination of this guy because it's what they do. If anybody is caught attacking their faith and the order comes at the behalf of their country, well, not all countries do this, but Iran, they even had a bounty on his head for this fictional book that he wrote. So last week, as we talked about, some young guy named Hadi Matar, age 24, decided he was going to be the one to do the deed of fatwa. So when Rushdie was going up on stage in New York to give a lecture, he rushed to the stage and stabbed Rushdie with a knife pretty severely. Rushdie is still in the hospital and will be there for a while getting over his stab wounds. However, he did not and will not die. But here's the thing. There were 2,600 people in the audience to hear Rushdie speak. They all saw the man come on stage and do his very best to kill Rushdie. A man from the sheriff's department was there, moved in to free Rushdie from the attacker and hold the man down until police could get there. So there was no doubt who stabbed Rushdie. However, in court this week, the young man, he pleaded not guilty. I just can't imagine what kind of defense he's going to use because, there was a lot of witnesses. Maybe it was the spirit within him that forced him to do it. But we're going to have to see. He's currently charged with second-degree attempted murder, which carries 25 years. Kind of interesting, this guy. He's 24 years old, yet the call to assassinate Rushdie came 33 years ago from the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the supreme leader at the time of Iran. All this big controversy is based on the fact that they thought that there was some passages in Salman's book that might have been blasphemous. But really, all this did was make the book a bestseller. Of course, Rushdie was in hiding for a decade under British police protection for a while, but had recently come out of hiding, started doing lectures, book tours. The president of Iran said that this threat against Rushdie was now over and that there was no longer a reason to kill him. However, the new Ayatollah, the one that took over from the previous Ayatollah, the one that issued the fatwa, said that everybody should assassinate this guy. Well, he said that the order of assassination, well, that order is irrevocable, means it's still on. This statement actually got the Ayatollah suspended from Twitter in 2019. Who would have thought the supreme religious leader in Iran was a Twitter user? He was posting things there about assassinating Rushdie, also the multi-million-dollar bounty, I think it's $3 million on Rushdie's head, keeps rising. Now, currently, the Tehran government says that they have nothing to do with this attack. They issued a statement that they should not be accused of being involved and that Matar, this guy, he acted alone. Now, this guy, Matar, claims to be a Shiite Muslim, even though he was born in California. He has said so far that he's only read a few pages from the Sanic verses, but said he didn't like the author because he attacked Islam, their beliefs, and their belief systems. He claimed most of his info he got from YouTube. Anyway, these are the days we are living in. If you watch enough YouTube, you could probably be persuaded to do just about anything, even rush on stage and stab a renowned author over a book he wrote a decade before you were even born. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. Thank you for joining us today. The Center for Disease Control, the CDC. That's who we look to when we need guidance on something to do with our health. That's their job. They study diseases. They keep all the info on anything in the world that's going to get us sick. If you're a doctor, you see something that you don't understand, something you don't know, who do you call? You call the CDC. Infectious diseases, foodborne illnesses, non-infectious diseases such as obesity, diabetes, environmental health, occupational safety, injury prevention. This is all part of the package that is the CDC. So something like a massive pandemic takes over the earth in a few months, they should be there to shine their brightest. But this week, we are finding out that maybe the CDC didn't shine as bright as they had hoped, or that we had hoped they would in the time of COVID. In fact, maybe they're going to be best known for fumbling the big COVID ball. Now, I know during the pandemic, I said multiple times that we should listen to the WHO and the CDC because the alternative was insane. In fact, some heads of state were telling us things that, well, could downright kill us. And I understand that worldwide pandemics don't happen every day and there's no set in stone procedure to follow, but the CDC itself, that this week, they admitted to making a lot of mistakes. I mean, first it was, you don't need a mask, and then you should always wear a mask. And then we need the mask, so please don't buy the masks. Then cloth, reusable masks are okay, and then cloth masks are dangerous. I mean, there's a lot of ball bouncing going wrong. Many of the mistakes were blamed on this ridiculously extreme cautionism. Keeping schools closed for so long when they were open, making sure the kids and parents were so scared to go back. I mean, honestly, it's really hard to say where the line should be drawn on what's excessive and what we really need to keep us safe. I mean, look at China. They are insanely cautious. There was a video of an IKEA furniture store with people rushing to get out of the store, running and pushing each other out of the way, trying to leave the store. Was it a fire? Was it maybe a guy with a gun? No. The Chinese had just announced that there was a possible case of COVID nearby and the city would be completely locked down. You want to get stuck inside an IKEA store for who knows how long? Anyway, the director of the CDC came out this week and made a statement that many changes need to be made in the CDC and that she said intense bureaucracy is going to continue to make many problems. However, they recently said that travelers in the U.S. should be required to wear masks to help the prevention of the spread of monkeypox. However, monkeypox is spread from body to body, not breathing, right? This leads many to think that the CDC has become politicized in our modern culture, which leads to certain announcements or policies which are non-scientific in nature to be used to appease a certain political party. This clearly happened back in 2020. So what now? Well, the director of the CDC said an overhaul is needed to revamp everything from operations to the CDC culture. What she suggests is to replace its academic culture with one that is quicker to respond to emergencies and how it communicates with the public. The agency is faulted for inadequate testing, surveillance programs, for not collecting important data on how the virus was spreading and how the vaccines were performing. And the big one, of course, they were under the influence of the Trump White House, which ended up dividing the country in extreme ways on what was the best path to take on the pandemic. Could it be that the divide in the United States that the CDC caused could be blamed on so many deaths? So the CDC has launched a multi-pronged review to evaluate its systems and processes. So let's see how this plays out. Right now, many people no longer trust our most trusted, worthy institutions. They started putting their trust in, honestly, crazy people rather than the people who have been working in this field their entire lives. But at least now we know. We have a better understanding of what went wrong and how to deal with it if it ever happens again. Could there be another pandemic in our lifetime? And if one happened, let's say, next week, what would we do differently? Would we do less or would we do more? It's okay to get COVID, or is it not okay to get COVID? Is it okay to take the vaccine? And really, how many vaccines do we really need to take? I guess I'll let the experts figure that out, whoever the experts are now. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. This is Eric Lecain. We're talking about stories going on around the world. Let's do a little update on the goings-ons in the Ukraine. First of all, the U.S. is clearly in this fight. I mean, not officially. They are not sending in troops, but they are dropping $775 million worth of stuff in the hands of the Ukrainians. It's all kinds of good stuffs in this package they just sent. There's some drones and armored vehicles and artillery. It's like a war care package. That's what it is. A Balabayan box of death. Okay, that's a little dramatic. So let's take a look at some of the goodies that are here because I find this stuff so fascinating. For the first time, they sent some of those Scan Eagle surveillance drones. Now, somehow these drones have the ability to tie in with the artillery and the rocket strikes as they can pinpoint exactly where the rocket is supposed to go. They can hit their target with incredible precision. These things are very small. They can fit into very tight, hard to reach places where the battles have become, I guess, what you might call stalemates, each side just shooting artillery at the other side, and then they repeat it the next day. Neither side really moves very far. So hopefully these drones will change that. One of the problems that the Russians have posed is that they have covered the entire landscape with mines. So the U.S. has delivered 40 heavily armored Max Pro mine-resistant vehicles. Now, don't confuse this with the iPhone 13 Pro Max. That's an Apple thing. This is the Max Pro. It's first developed in the U.S. when they were constantly rolling over mines in Iraq. These vehicles can hit a mine and virtually come out on the other side, still rolling. This is great for clearing stretches of land that have mines so that the ground troops can then walk across it. But there's a bunch of other devices that are included in this package. The TOW guided anti-tank missile system, boatload of 105 millimeter howitzers, rounds of those Carl Gustav recoilless rifles, which is great for small anti-armored weapons. It's small but very effective weapon and used in fighting in tight places. But last but not least, the fighter-launched high-speed anti-radiation missiles. Oh, I love these things. They can target Russian radar systems. Now, included in this care package was these X-caliber precision-guided artillery munitions. Okay, so this makes it so Ukrainians can shoot toward Russians that are dug in strongholds, and the bullets find their way to the target. Even if you miss, the bullet still hits the target. Anyway, mostly I just like listing these weapons because they have really cool names. But the main thing is that the Ukrainians have been able to hold off the Russians in many places and create basically just standoffs where the Russians can't move forward. Also, the Russians have been going on the offensive lately, not just defending lands, but actually striking first at Russian targets. In the long-held area of Crimea, that's won by the Russians, they have gone after many large targets there, warplanes and ships. Very dramatic attack that happened the other day in the middle of the night against the Russian ammunitions depot there. So this flooding of the Ukraine with weapons from the U.S. is really having an impact. But not everything is so rosy at the moment. Remember how we were talking last week about the nuclear plant in the Ukraine? It's like the largest of its kind in Europe. Well, things there are kind of going from bad to isotonic meltdown. Scary news that the Russians, they want to turn it off. Russians announced to the workers at the plant, don't come to work on Friday. The word is that they want to disconnect the plant from the grid. Now, Russia says they are doing this because the Ukrainians keep shelling. However, the Ukrainians are saying, we aren't shelling. We're not going to shell our own nuclear plant. They say the Russians are doing this to plan an attack. So basically, if anything goes wrong with the plant, each one is going to blame the other side. Now, the international community has said, hey, guys, let's make this plant off limits to the war because, one wrong bomb in the wrong place and boom, it could cause problems for years. But Russia has dismissed the idea, saying they occupy it and they're not going to give it up. And the word is that they want to shut it down so they can deny power to a huge part of the Ukrainian people. But here's the problem. You can't shut down a nuclear reactor. We know this because, ironically, of the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear meltdown in Russia. They tried to shut it down, but you can't shut it down. The nuclear particles can't be shut down. So if you shut it off, the whole thing, you must have a way to keep the coolant systems running because you need to stop to make sure that the whole thing doesn't melt down. Supposedly, Russia is currently looking for some diesel generators to do just that. But what worries everyone so much is that a generator, that's what keeping the cooling system running, but generators, they fail for whatever reason. And, there's like a war going on. Could Russia get that generator switched to a backup generator if it failed? Could they get the parts to repair it if they're needed? I mean, we all remember what happened in Japan at their nuclear plant. The tsunami that hit in 2011, it destroyed the cooling system, sending 3 reactors into a meltdown because they couldn't cool them. Who could have predicted that? Now, before, the Ukrainian president made a dire speech that if there was an explosion, that it would be the end for everyone, the end of Europe. That came after one of the reactors actually did catch on fire. Now, this is extreme, but what if a shell hit the plant while the generators were running? It's just so many what ifs. And of course, Russia is using this to its advantage, saying the Ukrainians, they try to take back, try to take their nuclear plant back or attack it. They're going to create the meltdown. The effects of the meltdown will be felt as far as Germany. Now, according to experts, the plant's reactors are surrounded by a wall of concrete 1.2 meters thick, which could withstand an airplane crashing into it. But what's unsure is how would it hold up against a missile? If the coolant loses its power and the water does not circulate to cool the fuel rods, the temperature of the fuel will begin to heat up. If it were to go beyond 900 degrees, there is going to be a problem. That's where there's a chance of igniting, sending radioactive isotopes into the air. If this were to happen, then the war would be the least of the Ukrainian worries. This would quickly become a planetary emergency. So currently, in the Ukraine, there is a game of chicken going on with a nuclear plant. The question being, how far are the Russians willing to go? Will they risk using diesel generators to cool the reactor? Many experts are calling that plan just plain crazy. That this is even being discussed or even considered is just plain crazy. Meanwhile, there in Russia, Putin has got some crazy ideas of his, throwing at the public. It seems that in the middle of this war, with all the economic struggles it's causing Russia, people are leaving Russia. Just not that much fun anymore in Russia. Not that it ever was that much fun. And this has led to some problems in population. Russia has got the land. They got plenty of land. They just don't have enough people now to fill the land. You have to start thinking in the long term. If the population stagnates, then as people die, there's no one basically to fill the spots when they die. Stalin had the same problem before back in Russia. He needed more people, so he started a reward system for having babies. Well, Putin has decided that's a good idea. I think we'll start it again. So he's bringing it back. He's trying to encourage women to have more babies and see if he can repopulate his continually reduced country. So for every woman that has 10 babies, they will get a handsome reward of 1 million rubles. That's 1 million rubles. So how much is a ruble worth? Well, the payment really comes to around 16,000 US dollars. The problem many are seeing with this scheme is that many women and families are in financial trouble right now. They need money right now. But before you can get this mountain of rubles, you must first have 10 kids, and they must all be alive. How many years is that going to take? And how much is that going to cost you to make 10 children? It could take you more than a decade and cost you millions of rubles in food, hospital, cost of education, all for $16,000. Would this encourage you to have more children? I mean, it would be awesome if it was in the Philippines because many already have 10 kids. Although I'm not sure how the rules work if you already have kids before the program went into place. Anyway, the program is called Mother Heroine, and not only is it designed to promote population growth, but also patriotism. Many critics has already jumped on this as a desperate idea from a desperate man. Putin may live many more years and Currently, whether he believes it or not, his popularity is waning there in Russia. There are many on the population glued to Putin's message that he will bring back the great Soviet Union of the past. However, as things begin to deteriorate, this mask of powerful Russians is slowly starting to come off. Now, many are starting to question Putin's resolve and questioning whether this is really the best direction for the Russian people. Meanwhile, if you want to make $16,000 the longest way possible, then I guess you have to have 10 kids. I guess if you have 2 sets of quintuplets, that might be worth it. Although I would not put all my Russian eggs in one basket. This is Lecain on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio. Okay, what is the largest economy in the world right now? It's the U.S., right? Right, it is. It's actually pretty far out in front. Who's in second? That's easy. That's China. But way far behind those two is third place country, which I just assumed was some European country, but it's not. It's Japan. Japan is the 3rd largest economy in the world. But lately, Japan has been having some trouble with one certain product, alcohol. Now, these days, we always think, you mean for the hands, right? Well, that would be a no. They're having trouble with the mouth alcohol, the kind that makes you feel good or makes you feel sick, depending on how much you just drank. Well, after COVID, people just stopped drinking. Young people are just not partying anymore the way that they used to. Now, in the U.S., the bars had problems, but people just drank at home. U.S. people just filled up their basements with beer and watched TV and ate chicken and drank right there at home. But in Japan, they just can't get people to drink at home alone, drowning their sorrows like the rest of us. So Japan needs to get their tax revenue back onto alcohol. So how are they going to get people to have a drink? In Japan, there's always one thing that excites people like no other: contest. The government has decided to get young people back to the thrills of drinking heavily. They're going to run a contest. It's called Sake Viva. To enter, you must have an idea on how you're going to get young people to drink more, either by promotional methods, product or design, even sales techniques using artificial intelligence, anything to get the in crowd, to get their lifestyle from staying at home, playing video games, to coming to the bar and partying it up with their friends. If you want to get on this, you have until September 9th to get in your entry. Although, I'm not sure if they accept Filipino entries or why a Filipino would enter. After seeing the prize, it's just that they use your ID in the promotion. I don't think there's any cash. But anyway, not everyone thinks it's such a great idea. For instance, some people don't think it's a very good idea at all to try and get people to drink alcohol, that it leads to things like alcoholism. And also, should the government be pushing young people to drink just to get tax revenue? In the past, the Japanese Minister of Health put out a statement that excessive drinking in Japan was a major social problem that needed to be addressed. But even so, the government has bigger problems than just people drinking too much. During the pandemic, bars and taverns were shut down for a long time. They showed that the sales of drinks was cut in half from 2019 to 2020, and it's just been hard to get things back to normal after being abnormal for so long. Of course, you think drinking at home would increase during the pandemic, but not really for people in their 20s. People in their 30s and 40s continue to drink, but without bars, people in their 20s, they're just not into it. So in any case, Japan is having a contest, trying to get people in their 20s to drink alcohol. You know, when I was in my 20s, you didn't need a contest. All you had to do was just ask and pay for my drink. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. In science this week, let's talk some about mosquitoes. Who in the Philippines has never been bitten by a mosquito? I see no one raising their hand. In fact, it's hard to live on the planet and not get some kind of bite, unless, of course, you live in a cave in Antarctica. The thing is that mosquitoes just love our blood. They can smell and sense it from far away. So whatever we do, we spray ourselves with repellent, They assume they won't bite us. But let me ask you this. Who has used mosquito repellent and gotten bitten anyway? Actually, the way most repellents work is they simply mask our body odor. Most animals and insects have a sensory to pick up specific human odors. And for mosquitoes, they seek out that human odor. Now, the repellent's job is to create a smell that confuses the mosquito and makes it harder for them to detect us. But a new study suggests that mosquitoes have multiple ways of smelling, that if they were to lose one way of smelling a human, another one would kick in. This study says that trying to conceal our smell from a mosquito might be a lot more complicated than we previously thought. Now, as we know, repellents are a major tool in the fight against disease carried by mosquitoes such as dengue and Zika. But the problem is researchers are finding out that mosquitoes seem to have a workaround to the chemicals that are in repellents. Mosquitoes use a variety of cues for hunting your blood. These include body heat and odor. They use their antennae and small appendages to smell us and to find the best spots on us to jab with their mosquito beaks. There are actually 3 types of sensors they use and can detect carbon dioxide coming from our breath and our odors, which draws them to us. Scientists used to think that they could hide the human scent from mosquitoes by disrupting the smell messages sent to its brain, but now they realize that even though they block the scent, other sensors take over and can get around that block. Scientists have been experimenting on nerve cells and neurons that figure out exactly how the mosquito's brains figures out how to tell when a human is near. What they found was that there are certain cells that have more than one type of sensor, that the neurons can detect more than one type of odor in us. I mean, how many smells do we have? This, it turns out, is not far from how fruit flies determine smells. It's unclear as to why mosquitoes have so many different ways of smelling us. I mean, when they evolved, they didn't realize we as humans were using artificial sprays to mask our scents. But even so, the mosquitoes have learned ways of finding us, even though the smell is hidden behind a spray blast of other smells. You know, one scientist suggested we change our way of thinking, that instead of masking our smells, we should instead create a new smell that mosquitoes won't like. Interesting. I know there's a guy in my building that uses a cologne that I'm sure would drive away any mosquito. Makes my eyes water. Maybe the scientists should look into that. Anyway, this is Lecain here on the World News Jam. You know, I remember back when I lived in Cebu. We had a very special night. Every Wednesday, I had a worker in the house who cooked for me, and she would make an extra special nice meal on Wednesday. I would set up the movie projector, and everyone would come in, and we would eat our feast, and we would watch Game of Thrones. That cook, she was about 4 feet 6 inches tall, and she would say, "We watch Game of Thrones tonight, boss?" And I would say yes, every Wednesday. And she would go, "Wee!" and she would run away and prepare herself for the big night. Oh, it was an incredible TV show. Sword fighting, the dragons, the backstabbing, with that little people character who kills his own father while sitting on the toilet. That new young king who was the product of like a brother-sister relationship. We got to see the young virgin mother of the dragons have sex with that guy who plays Aquaman, and the tallest female actress I have ever seen who could out-sword fight any man. Now, none of what I've said should ruin it for you if you haven't seen it, but of course, everyone has seen it. Supposedly, they had over 1 billion in viewership around the world, but alas, it ended, and it ended rather abruptly. Kind of soured a lot of people, saying, "This is how you ended it?" Obviously, I'm assuming they did that to leave a massive gaping hole for the one-day sequel. I mean, you don't have the world's most popular show in the world and then cut our throats just like that. Now, since that show, there have been a multitude of shows come out just like it. Many platforms like even Netflix. and they pushed out period pieces with similar ideas, but nothing has really been able to replace Game of Thrones. But now the Dothraki gods have spoken, and the sequel is out. Although it's not really a sequel, it's actually a prequel. It's all about what happened before Game of Thrones. In fact, it's more than 100 years before the original story took place. Remember, they were always talking about on the show about the time before when dragons were everywhere. Well, this is when the new story will take place, and it's called, coincidentally, House of Dragons. It's basically the history of the Targaryens. Remember in Game of Thrones, it started out with that beautiful blonde girl and her pompous brother. They were the last of the royal Targaryens. And the brother was always saying that he was the true ruler of the seven kingdoms. Well, this new story takes place back when his family were the rulers of the whole thing. They were all blonde and rode dragons. Anyway, the guy in the new show, sitting on the Iron Throne, needs to have a son, an heir to the throne, because his wife has only produced a daughter. And since Targaryens would rather burn the kingdom to the ground than be ruled by a woman, that's what they say, she needs to give him a boy. Oh, in the show, she is pregnant, by the way, because if she doesn't have a boy, then the throne would be passed to the king's brother, who, of course, is wild and potentially an evil and tyrannical ruler. Ooh, the whole thing sounds so good. So I haven't seen it yet. You know why I haven't seen it yet? Because it has its worldwide release today, Sunday. So here we go again. I wonder if it will be a hit with all the intrigue and evil characters and all the sex like the first one was. Oh my goodness, we can only hope so. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on RJTV, DZRJ. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. Please join us next week with more interesting stories from around the world. So until then, be safe out there. We'll see you then.